Okay, so we're going to go over creating fabric, creating cotton with 3ds Max and V-Ray, and I'm going to keep this very simple. It can become a lot more complex, but the purpose of this is to give you a simple cotton which looks good, which you can use for most of your renders without worrying about it. Just to go over the basics, my scene's very simple. I have 3 lights here, and these lights, much like in a photographic studio, are bouncing off these spheres which I've created, and they're sending the light back into the scene, and this is bouncing off this box. If I press F3 you can see. So these lights are bouncing off these, and this is bouncing off that, and that's what's causing the light in the scene. There's no HDRI in here, and if I click here on the render settings, I have nothing here in the environment slots. This is all blank, and up here if I go to rendering and environment, I've got no environment map in here. All I've got is this black background here, which I could also make white, but for this purpose I've kept it black. These boxes, they're just a plain V-Ray material. If I pick them, and this is the same, they're just the default V-Ray material with the diffuse change to 200. And I'm bringing up the material editor here by clicking up here on this, and if I left click and hold, I can also bring up the compact material editor, but I use slate all the time, so I'm just going to the slate material editor here. And to get this V-Ray material here, if you want, you can come over here to your materials, click on V-Ray, and just double click this and it will bring one into the scene. And all I've done is come in here and change this diffuse to this amount here. So, alright, let's talk about this cotton and creating this. So to start with, you need to start with a decent bitmap, a decent image to put on there. And for this I'm using real world scale. If I click view image, you can see what this is. Okay, so I've got this open here in Photoshop. If I take a look here, all I've done to create the brighter one, this is the cotton fabric which I'm using, and all I've done to create the brighter one is I've come in here and I've put a curves on and dragged this up slightly and possibly desaturated it slightly. And from that I have this brighter one here. Now all I'm trying to do with these materials, I'm not trying to get these perfect. I'm not trying to get this the perfect brightness and this one the perfect darkness, and this looks a little bit green, but I can adjust that. My point is I can adjust this in Max. Alright, so the first thing to do is to get a material assigned to this. And what I've done here is I've got a multi-sub object. If I click on this, this is one edit poly. And I've got a turbo smooth on top of it, which you get from this modify list. So I've got a turbo smooth on top of that, and I've set it to render iterations 1. But if I'm creating just this cotton material, I'm going to double click here, get a V-Ray material in the scene, and I'm going to drag this and put this up here. So you can see that that comes on here, comes onto the chair. Now, the next step is to get the cotton, the fabric, the texture into the scene. So here I've got this fabric I just showed you, and I drag this, and I place this straight into the diffuse slot. Now, this, if I say, oh yeah, let's see this in the viewport, and I click on here, well, first of all, this has to have a UVW on it, which it has, and it's been collapsed. So you can click on here, and you can just scroll down, bring this down to UVW map, and just set that to box, and set this to real world scale. And you can see the fabric there disappears, and that's because this needs to be real world. So we're going to say use real world scale, and I'm going to put in 400 mil. And now, I pressed Alt W to go into a viewport, Alt W to go back to these original 4. I'm just going to click on this one and do Alt W, and Alt Q to isolate, and then F3 to make it so I'm back into the shading mode here. And if I zoom in here, you can see the fabric texture on there. Now this already has a UVW map on it, and so I'm just going to delete this here. And you can see this fabric. Now, I'm going to come out of isolation mode here. I'm going to press Alt W to come out of this, and I'm going to right click. You see this border line, this dark line here? So I'm just going to right click on this one so this viewport is active over here. So now the next thing here is if I do a test render, I'm just going to bring up my render dialog, and I have this set here just at 1200 for my test render settings. And this is, I like to change this to progressive for tests. And the color mapping, I like to use linear multiply, so that's set to that. And GI brute force and light cache I've set to 500. So I'm just doing a quick test render here. And what you're going to see is you'll see that the chair is too dark and it doesn't really look like cotton. And there's not loads of things we have to do to handle this, but there's a few. You see it's flat. So if you look at some reference images of chairs, you see how they get lighter generally on the edge where the light hits them, they become lighter. This is great because there's such a difference here between the fabric, and then here you've got this edge which is really light down there, and along there it's really, really light. And here you again get this edge, you get this impression that there's loads of fibers just on the edge that are standing up and catching the light. And that's what you're seeing there. Even here, this is dark, and then here on the edge it's lighter. Here on the edge it's lighter. So this is a great example of fabric. So that's what we're trying to recreate. And also here, if you look, you can really see the bump in the fabric. So again, that's what we're trying to recreate there. So to get that fall off, the easiest way to do it is to put a fall off into your scene, into your material. So that's what I've done here. I'm just going to shift and click and drag this down, and then just delete these two lines out. So this is the fall off I've created. And the way you do that is you just come over here. I'm just going to close the materials and open up general and just double click here on fall off. Take this, just double click on this one. And with this mix curve, because the way this works, this says front and side. So that black is front and that's the side. It's got white on the side. So if I put this straight here into the diffuse, you'll immediately see what happens if I press F9. Bear in mind we've got the front is black and the side is white. And the problem with this is there's quite a lot of this fabric. Like it changes abruptly when it goes to the side. It doesn't change completely abruptly, but it's not as gradual as this default fall off. So I'm going to stop that. And what I do to get around that is I'm going to click on this button here, add a point in, bring it here, add another point up here, and then click over here on move, drag this guy down to the bottom, drag this guy up to 1, right click on this guy, Bezier smooth, and then drag this handle across a bit, right click on this guy, Bezier smooth, and drag this handle across, just so it's a smooth join there. And now if I click F9, oops, let me just save this here just so you can see. So this is closer to what I'm looking at. This is closer to what I want. So I'm going to stop this. So now the next thing is, all I need to do is replace these colors with this map. So I've already set this to the right size. I already know I've got my UVW map on there. So I'm going to plug this straight in. Like I said here, the front is black. And I'm going to plug this straight into map 1. So you can see that comes in there. And you can see what's happening here with the fabric just by double clicking on there. And then I'm going to come back to my maps. I've got this lighter one here. So I'm going to drag this in. I've got to set this, double click this guy, turn on real world scale, set this to the same size. And then put that into map 2. Now we're just going to do a little test, press F9. Okay, so we can see this is starting to look a little bit better. That's brighter, but we want to exaggerate this a little bit more than this. Just because if we look at the reference image, that's quite bright. There is a big difference here. So that's kind of what we're going for. So I'm going to come in here and take this one, and the way I do it is I put a color correction in. I don't bother taking the image in Photoshop and changing it. I'm just going to drag and drop a color correction onto these lines. And I'm going to make the dark a bit darker. So I'm going to click here on Advanced and drop this down to 0.8. And then I'm going to click on this guy, brighter, and I'm going to click on advanced, and I'm going to push this up to 1.6. And now I'm just going to do another test. Okay, that's starting to look better. That's getting there. I think maybe there's a little bit too much going on. So I'm going to change this. Let's change that back to 1. In which case I don't actually need the color correction, but I might use it again. I'm going to leave it there because I might adjust this slightly in a minute. Alright, so we're going to make a few other changes here. The first one is double clicking on this. We're going to turn off Fresnel. Now the reason I'm turning this off is because Fresnel reflections are when you look at like a 90-degree angle or almost 90-degree angle to a surface, and you see it starts picking up all these glassy reflections, and the reflections change. So that's what this is doing. But with fabric, because it's sitting up at all different angles, all these different fibers, you don't really get that. You might get it on silk or something like that. And you might get it on a velvet. Unlikely on a velvet. Again, because it's got so many different fibers in so many different directions. So I'm going to turn that off. And I'm going to come up here on reflection, and I'm going to turn it to about here. Click OK. And then the glossiness, I'm going to turn this right down to like 0.3. And so that's starting to look a little bit better. And then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to come into this BRDF, and I'm going to drop, see how you can see that highlight? I mean, I could also make this 0.4. You can see it a bit more. And then I'm going to drop this down to 1. And what this does is it takes this fall off between the sharp reflection or this highlight up here and where it's less reflective, and it adjusts that. If I push this up, that line becomes sharper and sharper and sharper, and if I come down the other way, it becomes softer and softer and softer. And fabric generally is very soft, so if I drop it down to 1, I mimic fabric closer. You don't have to do exactly 1. Some people do 1.2, 1.3, whatever you want, but the point is, I like 1. It's just simple and it looks about right. But the point is that you want to drop it down. Alright, so we've got some reflections going on, we've got glossiness going on, we've got Fresnel reflections turned off, and if I save this one now, and then I do another test, I'm just trying to show you this as we proceed and as we go along what's happening. Okay, cool, I like that. It's looking good. I mean, I can't see all the detail. If I want to see detail, I gotta stop it, turn this region on, and maybe I need to actually go into a higher resolution because this is only 1200. But we'll see. Maybe this will work. Okay, we can't see anything, yeah. So we're just going to go to the render dialog, which is right here. I'm going to click on common, and I'm going to change this up to, this is the resolution of my screen. So I'm going to put it up to there, and we'll just render this little box. Okay, so we can see the fabric coming through here, all these little details. But the next thing which we want, which we could see on that image, this reference image here, is you can see all of these little bumps and all this detail going on. So we're going to put that in. And also see, this is, even though it's nice and soft, the reflection, you see that it's still quite definite. It's like a definite kind of line. It's very even. So we want to break that up a little bit. And what we're going to do to do that is I'm just going to double click on these guys, and they have this blur. Now this blur's purpose is because this is a JPEG, and if I, if you come in here and you zoom in, if you zoom right in, the pixels are like this. So that blur blurs these pixels. So even if I zoom right in with the blur on, I'm not going to see pixels. And that's the purpose of it. Obviously, you've got different size maps used throughout, 3ds Max and V-Ray and various things. So the blur gets rid of that pixelation showing. So I'm going to right click here, and I'm going to right click on this one. So the idea here is just to make this a little bit less even and bring a little bit more noise into this fabric. So the next thing which we're going to do is we're going to take this one here, and I'm just going to plug that straight into the bump. And you can see again here, like if this guy here is set at 1, see all that noise disappears. And if I right click on this with the bump, all that noise comes in. This is caused from the bump here. There's a bit caused through the diffuse, but most of it's caused from the bump. So I like that. Like that's additional character coming into the fabric. I don't like it on a lot of things, but in fabric and cotton, I think that's great. And if I double click on this guy, the maps, that's set up 30. I might put that down to 20. I might put it up to 40. I kind of have to have a look and see. So we're just going to do a quick render of this. Great. I like it. I think that works. Let me just click on one of these. See how we've come along here? That was the first one, and this were the fall-offs. Okay, and I would like to check the bump up here as well. So I'm just going to do this area. Okay, I'm fine with that. I like that. I'm going to turn that off. Actually, I'm going to leave that on. I think the fabric itself is a little bit too small, so I'm going to come in here. This is set to what, 400? Let's just set it to 600. And same with this guy. And just to give you an idea, by doing that, if you view this image, I'm saying that's 600 mil across. So I'm saying that's 30, so I'm saying that's about 10 centimeters. So I don't think it is actually 600, but I think it's going to help us see it better. So that's why I put it up. I think 400 is closer to being correct, but I do like to see what I'm doing and see these fabrics. Okay, cool. I think that's good. You can see this character, all this detail here being added in. So in effect, really, that's pretty much all you need to do. I'm going to put this back to 1200. Just double click on here. Put that back to 1200. Make sure this guy here is checked so this changes as well. So one last thing which I would like to add is I like to add in a bit of noise and so on to the scene. So what I'm going to do, let me just drag this whole material down here. These are almost identical. Just going to delete this guy. Alright, so I've got this bitmap here which I've dragged into the scene, and that's this. And I have this from I did an earlier tutorial on how to create dirt maps. So I'm just going to put this into the reflection slot here, and the reflection glossiness here. I'm going to do the same with this, reflection, and reflection glossiness. Oh, actually, I've got to shift and drag this guy down and put him over here. Reflection and reflection glossiness. And the reason I have to do that is because this wood is not set to real world scale. So I've got this image here. This is tiling twice on the wood. And this one is real world scale. So down here I've got to put on real world scale. And we'll set this to 1000. So I'm not going to leave it like this, but just so you can get an idea, if I press F9, you can see kind of what's happening. So here it's exaggerated, and you can see here it's not reflective at all, and here it is reflective, and here you can see the effect this is having. And same on the wood here, you can really see the effect this is having. So we kind of want that effect, but we want it on a much smaller scale. So we're going to come into both, and I'm going to set this reflection down to 10%. So that means that it's mainly this, but it's 10% the map. And I'm going to do the same on reflection glossiness. I'm going to come in here on this one, and I'm going to do the same. And this is just going to add in a little bit of extra detail, a little bit of extra grunge into the map, which, you know, it doesn't take much time to add this in here, and I think it looks pretty good. Sometimes 10 is still too strong. I need to drop that down to 5, but I like that. So if I press F9 now, press F9 now, we shouldn't see this anymore, and we shouldn't even really notice this. But the thing is the detail will be there, but our eyes will be tricked because we'll see a slight change, but we won't really notice that we see it, much like in real life. You know, there will be a change. This is more reflective over here, and this is less reflective. So it just brings in a little bit of extra character. Same up here. We've still got those on at 10%, so we know that there is a change, but you're really not seeing it that clearly. And I really like doing that because it means that, you know, your material does have that extra quality. So you can see this looks pretty good. And if I save this now here, I think it looks pretty good. You know, if I try and compare it now, and I put this guy straight into the diffuse, I know I've still got these extra details that are going on here, but if I do this and press F9, just so you can see the difference, you know, if I save this here. So this is with the fall off, and this is without the fall off. So you can really see that makes a massive difference to the realism of the material, and so that's why you want to be adding that. And that's basic cotton, and that's what I'll use for a lot of things when I'm doing cotton and a lot of fabrics that I'm putting into the scene. I'll often have a fall off like that on it, and that just works really well and makes it look very realistic. There we go.